Node.js is just another technology we are supporting, and and everything that has something to do with Node kind of runs through me. Besides that, I'm doing courses for Linda. I have 3 daughters and a son. I'm teaching at the local university, and yes, that's what I do when I'm time. This talk is a little bit kind of my story, or kind of some loose connected things that I learned during the last 17 years, because I think everything is kind of cyclical. This means things are coming back again and again, so we can kind of, as Churchill said, we can kind of learn from the history to don't repeat mistakes in the future. And I'm starting at 1997 with my first webcam picture. So we had this Silicon Graphics 02, did cost almost as much as a typically small car. And then this guy came and said, now we take a picture for the internet, and we gathered there. I don't think that's me, the splat thing there. We gathered there, and then, wow, the picture was in the internet, and that was quite a great thing at this time. In 1998, I'm already playing around with HTML. Websites look a little bit like that. That's not done by me, but basically it's like that. This book hasn't been written at this time because there was no Google, there was no Facebook, there was no GitHub, there was no Wikipedia, and also no Stack Overflow. But what we had was something called news groups. So we could kind of, this was a way to ask questions and people could answer to that. It was a little bit like email, but still different. And here, so it's 1999, January, it's 17 years ago, I guess. So I'm writing my question in the MySQL news group where I say, I'm new writing databases for the web, but I have already databases for desktop. Yes, Microsoft Access. My host supports MySQL now. I don't know what this means. I really didn't. I know how a query works. No, I totally didn't. One thing we really learned in the web never forgets, and I really had no clue at all at this time, really. But in 2000, I'm already working as web developer, and I'm teaching Perl for the Austrian job service, because at this time everyone that kind of had problems getting a job was a perfect candidate to become a web developer. That was the strategy at this time. So Perl was a quite difficult language at this time, and I was already teaching it. So I most probably was very, very intelligent, right? So actually I wasn't. So when I tried to update a data set in a record in a database, I was first deleting it and then inserting it, because I just didn't know how to do it differently. The phenomenon behind all of that, and why I still thought I could teach, is called Dunning-Kruger effect. In short, it means you are so incompetent that you don't know how incompetent you actually are. And there is even a kind of a function of time here. So this is what you think you know, and this is what you really know. And at this time I was almost here. So I thought I knew it all. A little bit later, when I finished university, most probably this was in 2011, I think at this point where I thought, okay, now I know what I know. And then the humility kicks in, because then you start to find out what you all not know and kind of get desperate. I think I'm here now. So I would say this goes in this direction. I would not say it's like when you're here, you kind of, I don't know, move into the woods. But somehow I managed to found a company, and we bought a server, and I think it was really this server. We went to the bank, took out a loan. It was around 15,000 euros or so to get the server. Today we have serverless, so you can start, even without a server, you can build a whole company, so things really have changed. You put it in a rack at some data center in Vienna, so you put it in the car, drive to Vienna, put it in the rack, and every time when the server was down, I went into my car, drove 2 hours to Vienna, kind of rebooted the server. So this was how things were. But what I've learned, and I think an important learning at this time was, you really should strive to understand the full stack. And with full stack, in this terms, I mean this full stack. The ISO-OSI full stack. This means at least know a little bit about the protocols of the web. Know how routing works. Know how HTTP works, basically. Know how SMTP works. Because I think it's essential to, when things go wrong, to understand how these funny little packets kind of come to the browser and back, and how everything fits together, I would say. So now we are in 2002, I have a company, the internet is booming everywhere, not in Austria. We are just waiting for the boom to come to us, and then the world ends. I think it started with WooCom. This was one of those new startups. They had some fashion store, and at this time everyone was big time investing in everything, so that had something to do with new economy, new media, and so this whole industry was booming. And if a company had the name Linux in there, it was already kind of overrated, and there were companies that went from 10 people to 100 people in 2 months, because it was this time. And then WooCom went broke, and then kind of, I think it started with that, and then all investors kind of moved out, because so new economy companies can actually fail, and so they were kind of shocked. And this is what happened then. So we were at this boom phase here, and then this is the NASDAQ, and then everything crashed until here. We're here around 9/11. 9/11 was kind of, then everything was gone, actually. And I googled a little bit and to find out how this felt in Silicon Valley at this time. And this guy, he writes, oh man, it was brutal. As a youngish startup guy, everyone I knew was affected. Most everyone I knew lost their job. Soon after, most everyone I knew moved away. And here he writes, the contrast between the bubble years was epic. Gone were the open bar events, the fabulous lounge parties, gone were the jobs in companies, and soon after gone were most of the entrepreneurs without a safety net. Many back to live with their families to regroup. Sounds somewhat familiar, right? So now if you go to Silicon Valley today, it's like that. Everything is startup. Everyone working there is kind of, what? They don't have a breakfast buffet at this job, or they don't have kind of this table football thing. Oh, it won't work. I need a private chef at my company, basically. And I think this can happen anytime again. I think even I would say it's not the question if it will happen, it's the question when it will happen. And no one will end up like that, right? So I don't know how genuine these pictures were, but at this time we saw them a lot. And one learning from that, I would say, is make the hay while the sun shines, right? And I'm not talking so much about money, I'm talking about also preparing for the bad times by investing into your skills and into your knowledge. We should not settle for mediocrity, right? Because there are so many languages around. And I think programming is not about being a JavaScript developer or being a Node developer. Programming is very much about concepts. I think that maybe when you do JavaScript, for instance, try something functional like Scala. I did a course at Coursera about Scala, and it really helped me big time to really understand also JavaScript and also why we use underscore and how things fit together. So what I want to encourage you is see yourself not as Node developer or as JavaScript developer, see yourself as engineer. Learn concepts, learn how to solve problems with different languages, because after all, if everything you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail, right? So this was the course I did this this time. It was really hard. This Multimode SP, he invented Scala, so he knows what he's doing, and it was really interesting to learn that. And all those resources are free on the net. So now it's the time. When you have time, invest some time to kind of foster his skills. So between 2002 and 2012, I did many projects, mostly web projects, many PHP based. And believe it or not, some apps of them are still running like that. This means they are kind of haunting me still today, because the problem is when I wrote did this app in 2002, 2004, whatever, I never thought that in 2015, 16, 17, I will have to look at them again. But then this call comes, this website is down, could you please help us, even if you're not anymore employed at this company, this call will come, and then you're like, oh my god, which idiot did this? Because this code does not make sense and you know it was you. So my learning is, and I think it's important, write code that your future you will understand and be proud of, right? So always when you when you do something, do it right. And my favorite theory I have about that is the broken windows theory. So they tried it out, or they did some studies. When you are in a city and you have a building, and this building stands there and everything is fine, and then someone smashes one window there, and you wait a few weeks and the whole building will kind of start to rot away. It will kind of fall apart. There will be graffiti on there, people will not care anymore. Or put a car in a bad neighborhood, it will stand there for some time, it's no problem. But then someone smashes one window, and within days it will be totally taken apart. And the same happens to code. Because you know those temporary workarounds, right? So, yeah, let's fix it somewhere, somehow, right? Let's do it somehow. And those temporary workarounds stay in there because, and then the next person or you again come in, okay, it's broken anyway, so let's fix this quick and dirty again. And all those quick and dirty fixes basically pile up in your code. And 10 years after, you may have to deal with that again. But why bothering with your old code, right? So so you think, oh, this old project, let's rewrite everything from scratch. Because that's how we like to do it, right? So I so often hear developers say, oh, this project we worked 2 years on, this whole stack is not modern anymore. Let's do everything fresh and let's just take 2 weeks for that because it's basically easy. We have done it already, right? But you have to know here, there's a little bit of German, but here I have the translation, this is the achievable capabilities of some application. And this is the effort it takes to kind of add new capabilities. And we really see that software has a saturation curve. It's right that at some point it's really, really hard to add new features to your code. And so it makes sense at some point to start over and do it fresh. But you have this gap here. Because when you switch to when you do it fresh and you switch to kind of a new stack and everything, and the project is somehow complex, you won't have the same features again from the start. Because there is so many inherent kind of knowledge woven into this whole system over time that you cannot kind of redo so easily. And you have to be aware, and this is the project where you do something for a customer, then you do it fresh, and the customer is kind of totally desperate because things that worked before don't work anymore. We had this already, now it's gone. And so you have to be aware, if you do something from scratch, then there will be a feature gap at the beginning at least. But okay, let's rewrite it, but does this site really need React and isomorphic JavaScript? I know it's so nice, we want to use it, right? And we also want to rewrite our front end every 6 weeks, right? Because there's always a new technology, especially in JavaScript. So new technologies are coming up, I would say, almost monthly, right? Excuse me. And there are companies that kind of pushing that. So it's, and even I am like that. If it's from Google or from Facebook, it has to be awesome, right? Because they know what they're doing. So I was kind of trying to get into React and then looking at this talk where they introduced Reactive Flux, and there they said basically, yeah, we had this problem with this notification thingy on Facebook, so we had a problem that it didn't get updated, or when someone read it, it wasn't set that it was read, so we had big problems. And we had this ugly MVC, because MVC sucks, thing here, and this is why it didn't work, so we had to invite Flux. And I was like, wait, what? Let's look at this again. So, since when do kind of errors go back from the view to the model in MVC? That's kind of wrong, and there was a Q&A afterwards, and there were a lot of people sitting in there, and no one said anything. Everyone was like, hey, yeah, MVC sucks, we need Flux, definitely. And maybe she had a point, but this point she was not right explained, actually. And then I scrolled down, and here you have all those comments where people saying, oh, that's not true, and something is wrong here, this is not, what are they talking about? This is not MVC, but still, after that, everyone was like, oh, MVC is a bad thing, we really need Flux because this solves all of our problems. So, and honestly, I'm the same, so I would not have stood up there at the Q&A and say something like, that's wrong, right? Because I don't know, I'm always kind of humble, and I think people are always right. But you should really start to question things and don't believe the hype. After all, Facebook and also Google are companies. If Facebook pitches React to the community, they have some kind of agenda behind that. Angular and React are pitches for new developers. They try to sell it. They have a marketing etat to sell it to you. It's not because they kind of want to give something to the community. There's someone at accounting that says, okay, this React initiative, how much does it cost us to do that? And then there is a budget, and then they do that. And you should really be aware of that. That's almost all of the time, nothing is for free, and everything is about selling things. So if there is a hype, you really should question the agenda of the people that are doing that. One important learning that comes from that, because all those things are frameworks, after all, and all the things, everything around that is code, and that's other people's code. So what we really love to do in the whole JavaScript world is taking on needless dependencies, because code written by some stranger on the internet is always perfect, right? So it's a very low-hanging fruit to use third-party components and also whole frameworks. To use frameworks that give you a generator where you just click on a button and everything kind of, there you have your blog in 5 minutes, like that. The problem is that every time you rely on someone else's code, you basically have to deal with this code when you want to try to change something. So at this point, you don't anymore work with a language or have to learn a language. You have to learn other people's code, and you have to debug other people's code. There were a lot of examples in the past, like Symfony for PHP. You have a generator, you run it, and it creates all your classes and everything for you. But then at some point, something breaks, some query does not work, and you get some error from deep down of the framework, and you really don't know where it comes from. And there's the question, isn't it better to do some things on your own, maybe instead of kind of having it quickly, but then have to really deal with the code and really learn how everything fits together when things start to go wrong. For instance, and in JavaScript we have this modularity thing currently, especially when we look again at things like React, where everything is kind of separated in modules with different versions that somehow fit together. So I tried a React app project, and when I was kind of fed up with everything, I did this npm uninstall here to get rid of all those dependencies. I needed to just create this isomorphic React application, and it was 13 dependencies, megabytes of code by someone else. And you really have to be careful about that, because this React, this Webpack, everything creates code for you. This whole transpiling, and I think we will come to that again, this whole transpiling thing is really a problem. And talking about that, that's NPM is actually quite the same problem here. So we have, as we see here, obviously the programming world has around 400,000 problems, right? So there are 400,000 things that solve 400,000 problems. And when I just look at this, I had this last week, I needed something to convert some UTF-8 HTML entities. And here you see the results when you need some Node module to convert HTML entities. You get, I don't know, this is Node HTML entities, HTML entities, Node and each A. So there are so many modules that really all solve the same problem, and it's really hard for you to find out the right module to use, right? Because you don't ever know, is it still maintained, or you have to look at, is it still maintained, how many bugs are there, and you really have to deal with that. And Danny Brenner will talk about that, I think, a little bit later when he talks about node security. You should really think twice before npm install anything. Or yarn. The same applies for copying and pasting from Stack Overflow. So here it's again from one of those HTML entities libraries. There they have a clear error in their documentation. So they have these var entities, and then they do entities equals new entities. So they create unintentionally a global here. And there is a question on Stack Overflow, and this guy that kind of answered this question kind of copy-pasted it from the documentation right into Stack Overflow. And I'm totally convinced that the next person will take this and copy it right into their code, right? So, because it's on Stack Overflow, it must be right. There's no one really said that there is something wrong with this code. So you really have to really be careful when you kind of take things out of Stack Overflow or from somewhere. It's always someone else's code, and you really should understand it and line by line and be sure that it really works as intended. Here are my last words already. These are some key principles, I would say, that are kind of important for me. One key principle is don't repeat yourself, try. This means basically when you have code, you should, and it's quite easy in Node actually to repeat yourself. Really try to not kind of copy-paste code around, like the same logic at some places. But also this means that you should, for instance, when you have some Node application and Express application, and you have this application script here, and you have a config, pass in the config here into the application. That's a really practical example how to do it. So here you run it, and you require the app, and you pass in the config, and you have it here. And you require this config once, and not in each of your classes, right? Because then you can change how the config is loaded, how things are done. Or for instance, you could use parents for your routes here. So you can even pass in whole classes into the routes and really pass this through your routes. And you have one single point in your application where this one service, this one class is created. And as soon as something changes here, like the signature of this constructor, you change it right at one place. And I think the rule of thumb would be here that you should not have requires to your own code, like require / spread over your whole application. Because really try to load things at one point, instantiate it, set it up, and then pass it through your code. And that's a thing that's kind of a little bit more complicated in Node because of all those callbacks. Also speaking about callbacks, it's always a good idea to create functions that deal with the return or with the return of the whole function, so that the callback functions. Does this make sense? So you have a callback that reads something from the database, or a function that reads something from the database, then the callback comes back, then you do something with the database result, create one function that can deal with different database results instead of creating it again and again and again, because I see this quite frequently in someone else's code. And YAML, I think, is also important. You ain't gonna need it. So when you do something, really question yourself, do I really have this project? Will it be so large as Facebook tomorrow? Do I really have to set it up like that? Do I really have to create it like that and prepare for that? So really be pragmatic about what you're doing. The last rule is keep it simple, stupid. Again, think about your future self. Create your code in a way that it's easy to grasp, easy to understand for others. And if you like this whole philosophy about programming I was talking about, read this book. If you read any book, read really this book. It's the Pragmatic Programmer, where really many of those rules are kind of inherent. This whole philosophy I was more or less talking about is explained. And that's the end. Thank you. Almost in time, right?
Yeah, we only have time for one question. So if I have one, go ahead.
So it was, I kind of like your presentation. I totally agree a bit with NPM thing. So don't you think that it's a bit against the don't repeat yourself principle? So actually we are publishing something on NPM just because we don't want to repeat ourselves in someone else's selves.
That's a very global don't repeat yourself. So this would mean that each problem in the world, but why then do we have 400,000 packages, right? They are repeating themselves. If there was one package to solve one problem, only one problem, a package for every problem in the world, I would agree with that, but they are repeating themselves again. So I get that using modules makes, I'm not saying that using modules does not make sense, but you really have to be careful which modules you use, because people are pulling in dependencies like this typical left pad thing, I don't know. So everyone, I think people know that. So that's a dependency you don't need npm install for 15 lines of code. That's a thing you should question, you should have a pragmatic approach to that, basically.
Thank you, Daniel.